Each day of my childhood, we had milk delivered in glass bottles. By the time I was in 3rd grade, I could ride my bike to school by myself. That's what it was like in Madison, Wisconsin in the 1970s. Both of my parents were professors at the university, and ultimately they inspired me to pursue my career in medicine. But it was my dad's brother, Uncle Bert, who showed me something which ultimately allowed me to understand US pharmaceutical pricing. He was an immigrant with a high school education, and he lived in New York City. When we'd go to visit him, he'd take us uptown to this cheap Chinese restaurant that was wedged under the elevated train. And sometimes he'd take us downtown to Times Square. Back then, it was a sordid place. There were people rolled up against buildings, strung out, and others standing on corners selling their bodies. And here and there were card dealers trying to entice passers-by to play a game called 3-Card Monte. It's a simple game. The dealer has 3 cards. 2 of them are black, 1 is red. He places them face down, he scrambles them around saying, "Follow the red card." And then some intrepid gambler or tourist stops by, trying to select the red card. If he finds the red card, he gets the payoff. I stood there, little kid with my Uncle Bert, watching these people lose over and over again. And then I saw the trick. When the dealer turned over the card that was red, he would furtively swap it for a black card, just as he turned it over. There was nothing fair about this at all. This was a hustle. Finding the red card, it didn't lead to the payoff. And that insight has helped me understand what's wrong with pharmaceutical pricing. Let me explain. We'll spend about $500 billion this year on pharmaceuticals. One of the reasons we'll spend so much on drugs is because we pay about 2 to 3 times for drugs what people in most Western countries pay other than the United States. Here is a chart of cancer drug prices over the past 50 years. These are all new drugs at the time. It's adjusted for inflation. It's adjusted for dosing. And you may say, this looks like a gradual upward rise in prices. But look at the y-axis because it's on a log scale. I am showing you that adjusted for inflation and dosing over the last 50 years, cancer drug prices have risen 100-fold. I'll say it again, 100-fold over the last 50 years, adjusted for inflation and dosing. And here is the rate of new drug approvals in cancer over that same time period. But this one's graphed on the right-hand y-axis on a linear scale. It is up about 3-fold over that same time period. And now this slide is complete. It shows the central dogma of pharmaceutical pricing. Rising prices encourage investment, which leads to innovation and the creation of new drugs. This dogma, however, has a flaw, and I think it's a calamitous one. When rising prices drive innovation, they lead to innovation so high-priced that some people can't afford it. The US, compared to other Western countries, actually ranks last in access to new cancer drugs. Compared to other Western countries, US patients are 6 times as likely as patients in other countries to stop their medications because of their costs. This is a map of patient stories about high drug costs. Inside each of these dots are people and families reporting that they can't afford their medications or have to trade off other essentials like heat and food in order to afford them. This map makes me want to imagine, what if we just took away all the patents and exclusivity from all of these drugs? Well, what would happen in this thought experiment? All drugs would be instantly generic and cheap. Now, investment in innovation would dry up. Stock prices of pharmaceutical corporations would take a nosedive. Retirement accounts, mine included, would take a serious hit. But some really good things would happen too. Those 2.7 million people in the United States today who have hepatitis C virus infections, an infection that erodes their livers, that causes liver cancer, that places some people on the transplantation list who may never get a transplant, they're going untreated today because the treatments cost $40,000 per person. Take away patents and exclusivities, and girls who live in poor states would get the human papillomavirus vaccine at rates that girls in wealthy states do today. The vaccine today costs $600. It helps prevent girls from ultimately getting cancer. People with cystic fibrosis could afford the $250,000 per year treatments that help them breathe. So this thought experiment helps illustrate the flaw, the problem in our approach to pharmaceutical pricing, but it doesn't provide a solution. I'm envisioning a very different game. It has 3 rules. The first one is drugs should have a single price for each of their uses in the US. Today, hundreds of different insurers negotiate with pharmaceutical corporations over the price of each of their products, leading to many different prices for each drug. That not only adds overhead, but it actually impairs access. And the reason is that insurance companies use the threat of blocking access for a drug in order to get price concessions from that drug's manufacturer. And then they follow through. They tack on large out-of-pocket costs for patients that then affect those who can least afford it. That's what causes this map. The second rule of this game is we should limit the roles of middlemen and pharmacy benefit managers. These entities sometimes steer people to more expensive drugs when their cut is larger. And did you know that doctors and hospitals also bake in profits when they administer expensive medications? Start to finish, a drug that starts at $10,000 can be $15,000 by the time a patient receives it because of these middlemen. That is, if he or she can afford it. And actually, across this system of middlemen, there's a pernicious incentive. The more drugs cost, the larger the profits the middlemen make. Here's the third and final rule of this new game. The prices of drugs should be tied in a fair way to their actual value. That would mean that the rewards to the corporations that develop them would be properly calibrated. This sensible structure of balancing benefits and rewards is called value-based pricing. And here's a schematic of the drug abacus that my team created for calculating value-based prices. And that is my Bitmoji. Today, when the Food and Drug Administration receives data on a new drug, the company proves that the drug works and that its side effects are acceptable. Yet we don't use those data to price drugs. We could. Those data don't just show that a drug works. They show how big the benefits of that drug are. They don't just list the side effects. They say how frequent they are and how severe. You can take that information and other data about the drug, feed it into the drug abacus, and out comes a value-based price. This is the actual drug abacus. I have it set up here today for 22 of the newest cancer drugs. I've labeled them A through V. You will see on each vertical line, which represents a drug, 2 beads. The gray beads reflect what the US government pays for those drugs today. The blue beads reflect the drug abacus prices. The innovation here is that across the bottom, you will see 6 dials that can be adjusted to calibrate the formula for calculating a drug's price. You can set the formula based on what matters most for society. As you move these knobs, it shifts value from one drug to the next. There are 2 insights I would like to share with you. The first is, you can turn these dials as much as you want. You cannot get the blue beads to sit on top of the gray beads. That means that current pricing is not aligned with the value of drugs in cancer, no matter how you define value. But the other insight I want to show you, I have to show you by manipulating the drug abacus. Imagine we want to increase the incentive for drugs that prolong life. We do that here. Now I'm going to increase that incentive. You can see by turning up the reward for drugs that prolong life, I have increased the prices of all drugs, but not to the same degree. And it's tempting just to stop there. We want better drugs. We want the incentives to be large. In fact, it's tempting to turn up a lot of these other knobs too, because we just want better drugs. But the problem is, we also need to contain how much we spend. Remember, we started spending 2 to 3 times what people in other Western countries spend for drugs. So you also have to make some hard decisions. And I'm going to make one here just as an example. I'm going to turn down the incentive we pay for drugs that treat rare diseases. There. I've lowered the price for some of these drugs and put the system and spending back into balance. Now, a decision like that is difficult to make. What the drug abacus provides is a way of examining it out in the open and understanding its impact. So this is the game I am proposing. When a drug comes on the market, its price should be calibrated to its actual measurable features and value. That would ensure that the rewards to the corporation that discovered it are properly calibrated. Once a drug has a fair price, insurance companies should remove the barriers that currently stand in the way of important innovations getting to the patients they're intended to serve. Drug middlemen will need to make the supply chain work, but they shouldn't be able to bake in profits that go up when drug prices go up. That approach would be a more rational distribution of our drug dollars. We would see an end to the log-scale upward rise in drug prices I showed you earlier, and hopefully we'd see that map I show you clear up. By aligning the prices of drugs with what society aims for, we can direct innovation in the direction we all want. Just before I came here, I took a walk through Times Square. It's changed an awful lot since my days there with Uncle Bert. It's clean and shiny, and it's full of happy visitors. And if you walk a few blocks in any direction, you'll run into scientists hard at work looking for the next new treatments. And you'll meet patients who are signing up for the clinical trials in which they're being tested. But you will also walk by people who, when those new treatments are discovered, will not be able to afford them. We are still trapped in that 3-card Monte game I saw back there in the 1970s. But what keeps us there is inertia. It's not that the math is too hard. It's not lack of data. I hope we're able to play a different game, one that's transparent and fair and sustainable. One, I guess, where you'd say all the cards are turned face up. Thank you.